Hello, my name is Peter Kerper. I'm the curator of Museum M here in Leuven, and we are delighted to have you here because you are one of our heroes in the field of museum education. Please, Pat Villeneuve, tell us something about your work.
Well, it's really nice to be back here, Peter. I always enjoy working with you. I'm Pat Villeneuve. I am professor and director of arts administration in the Department of Art Education, Florida State University, where we have graduate programs, masters and doc, in educuration.
Educating, a large word. Please tell us, what does that mean?
For me, it's an attempt to reconceptualize roles within the museum. I started my career as a museum educator, and it didn't take me long at all to recognize there's a museum hierarchy. And the curators were here, and education was here. And there were so many things I wanted to do, and I kept working very hard to try to advance the position of education, if not even do this. But of course, I didn't have any luck with that. And one moment I realized, you know, curators are enjoying this position. They're not likely to give way. We need to find a different way to think about this. And that way that I thought about it was educuration. It was a reconceptualizing of how we do work. It's putting education, obviously, with curation to bring more people to the table, to have a say in the exhibition making process.
Okay, you know you are talking to a curator.
Yes, and you know I am also a curator now.
Ah, voilà, okay. So you know that there are a lot of similarities between the two functions or two roles, but also a few differences. And I've noticed that for a curator to deal with educating and deal with other people around the table, like you say, it's a bit of a power struggle. Did you have an experience of that struggle for power?
Well, yes, of course. And I think this is something that we just need to find a different way to think about. When I curate, I do curate collaboratively. And for me, it actually is a great relief because I don't have to be responsible for getting absolutely everything right. And I very much appreciate hearing different perspectives. And I think that they enlarge the interpretation and give me different ways, challenge me to think about things in different ways. I understand that a traditionally trained curator may find it an adjustment, but it's something that I've fully embraced and I really enjoy.
If you talk about that, if you talk about adjusting as the role of curator, if you want to really go full-fledged co-creative, you need to change not only the institute itself, but also the attitude of the public towards the institute.
Yes, potentially. I think probably the bigger change is a cultural change within the organization itself, and it probably necessitates a structural change. I've certainly heard these questions for a long period of time. How do we make these changes? And one of the things I'm currently working on is a model for curation. It's called Dimensions of Curation. And what it does is it delineates 8 different approaches to curating.
Okay.
And some of them are educuration. Others are more traditional, like museums are comfortable with and different people are comfortable with. But I really feel that if we're going to be able to affect change in curation, we have to have a way to talk about it. Other than, you know, I like this, or this is the way we've always done it, or I don't like that. And so right now I'm working with my collaborator, Anne Rosenlove, on this, and we are trying to articulate it. And that's one of the reasons I'm here in Belgium. I'm on a Fulbright, and I'm working on the book.
Well, if you say 8 different views or takes on curation, can you elaborate that a bit?
Yes, it's built on a competing values model because there are so many competing values in museums. When we talk about interpretation, where do we focus? Do we focus on the object or do we focus on the audience? Those are competing values and different people have different ideas about that.
Absolutely.
Curatorial power, who's in charge? Is it the solitary curator or is it collaborative? Those are also competing values. And we've put those on continua to represent it's not just one or the other. There's a blended range of possibilities in between. And then we went 3D with curatorial intent. Why is the curator or why are the curators doing this? And when you combine this as a 3-dimensional model, you get 8 different approaches to curating, each of which will attract or disenfranchise certain audiences. And I think it's a very interesting model if we can use it intentionally. Because a lot of these curatorial decisions are made sometimes, I think, implicitly, based on how things have always been done or based on the culture at the museum. And this gives us a way to start talking about that and thinking more deliberately about it.
Well, as my experience as a curator, indeed, there's a lot of tradition involved.
Absolutely.
And the tradition is maintained also by the medium which a museum is. Also very practical approaches, very, very simple things like where do you put text? Do you put text? What kind of text do you put in your halls? To change that, it's a real re-education of the people working within the museum and the public.
Yes, and it helps if they're willing.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, we tried we tried to bridge the gap between the educational department and the curational department, because indeed here in it was the same thing. And then we tried to shift it, and we've noticed that bringing the curators and educators together, that works marvelously. But if you say an 8-dimensional process or an 8-dimensional model, that means there are a lot of other possibilities we could use in museums.
Yes, yes, and we present the model as a way to think about curating. You could look retrospectively at exhibitions you've already done and try to identify where it fits in the model. But then you can also think about it in future terms. Okay, we find that we've been here in the model a lot, but maybe we want to be here. And then you can use this 3-dimensional model as a roadmap to make transitions to other approaches to curation.
And is there a difference between an art museum and a history museum, a technological museum?
I think there probably are. We developed this for art museums, but we've always looked at any other source that can inform what we're doing. And when we teach this model in our classes, we have students from many different disciplines, and we always say to them, this was made for an art museum. Where else can you see this working? And two of the answers we get most frequently are anthropology and history. But I think there are other possibilities as well.
Okay, let's go for the art museum.
Okay.
How would you approach a museum like M in your model? Because I'm really fascinated. I want to learn something and rethink our museology.
You could use it in lots of different ways. It would be possible, for instance, for a museum to say, this is the one specific type of exhibition we want to do, and always curate that. Or it's equally likely or probable that you could look at it and say, we do have different audiences who come here, and they have different interests and different needs. So let's make an exhibition program that's balanced, that has different types of approaches to exhibitions, so that anybody who comes can find something that they like.
So it is possible to make the exhibition for the 100% of the audiences. I find that difficult personally.
No. What I'm saying is, if you use different approaches from the model throughout the entire building, then the people who came in to your educuration attempt and said, "Oh, we don't like it," there's something in another gallery that might be more traditional, that may be more to their liking.
And what do you think about? Well, you have the museum as an institute. But what do you think about what the institute should do? A museum should have a purpose, don't you think?
Well, I think so. And I'm going to give you an answer from the United States, where most museums are not profit organizations. And the intent of that is to serve the broad general public. But in the United States, it's a minority of people who go to museums. And so if we want to just think philosophically about the reason that museums exist in the United States, we need to do something more.
I ask a question very specifically because I think that the idea of educurating, it's a skill, literally, that can be used in a large, broader area of our society. Because everybody's curating these days. I mean,
it's true.
Your Instagram feed or whatever, your Pinterest page, whatever, that's also the act of curating. So if you give the idea of educating to your visitor, that might empower them to well, master the art of curating. Oh, that's very sweat. But they can master the art of curating themselves and be more independent,
Right.
let's say.
Understand more of what it entails.
Yeah.
And feel more ownership in their learning.
Yes, and be also, how should I say, more independent from influences by the visual. So I think that one might be one of the reasons of existence of museums.
I can see the visual literacy approach to M coming through here.
Well, but it's not that different, you know.
Yeah.
The idea of visual literacy at the one side, the transhistorical approach at the other side, and the idea of educurating, it's three parts of the same coin. Well, difficult, but anyway, it's three dimensions of the same thing, and that is, in my opinion, I see they're really interrelated.
I think visual literacy in particular is really important in museums, and that may depend on what country you're in. In the United States, in many ways, we have adult viewers who have not been trained as part of their public education to go to museums and have the visual skills to look and understand what they're looking at. And so working with visual literacy is a really good point of entry into starting to understand works of art on your own.
Well, but then indeed we are talking yet again about art museums, literally. Another question is, if you do a cooperation between all the different people involved in the process, the public, the curator, what kind of problems do you encounter, and how do you deal with them?
The one comment I hear the most is, this is going to take a lot of time. And I just say, because that's not the way you're used to doing it. If you'd always done it this way, you wouldn't think of it as taking a lot of time. You know, build it into your process. I've had some very interesting experiences with co-curation on trying to be a team player. And there was this one time that I thought I had this great novel idea, and I'm with a room full of people. And I said, what do you think of this? And it was like, oh, no, this would be bad, this wouldn't work. And there was one quick little minute there that I was so tempted to just say, well, I'm going to take my toys and go home then. And I'm like, no, you are an advocate for co-curation. You're an advocate for education. And learn your lesson. That means that no one person is going to get his way or her way all the time. Right.
Okay. Imagine I'm in a scientific committee of an exhibition, and I have this idea I really want to work on, probably a completely crazy idea, and I propose it to my fellows in the scientific committee, and it's completely out there, so they say, no, we're not going to do that. But you know you're onto something. Can't you force it a bit?
Well, let me tell you specifically what this exhibition was about. We were using a museum's collections of modernist works on paper. And we knew from previous working with the audience that the audience didn't particularly care for these works of art, didn't understand them, just wasn't interested. And this museum was located in a very strong writing community with lots of poets. So the initial idea we had was to invite in local poets to write poems, evocative poems, expressing what they were seeing in the works of art. And we were all good with that. The activity where it fell apart, we were trying to decide how to engage people more in the galleries. And I just said, why don't we do magnetic poetry? Do you know what it is? You get a box, the little words on magnets, and you put it on your refrigerator. Well, I thought it was just the coolest idea. And we had the installation team there. Wait, what are you going to put this on? You know, I said, well, can't we have metal by each artwork? No. And the poets were there. Who's going to pick the words? And I'm like, you know, can we have some blank ones? No. They have to do their own. And so I said, I turned it back to them and said, okay, what else do we do then? Give me another idea. Give me a better idea. And honestly, I think that what they came up with, what they suggested, worked better than my idea.
It was a bit of a collective wisdom. Yeah.
And I think you just have to be prepared to win some and let other people win other times.
That's one thing, but you also need to get the process right, I guess.
You have to get the process right, and also you have to get certain critical information. I think we have to make sure that it's being addressed appropriately.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking we did our very first way back project. We did like that. I mean, that's already years ago, and it turned out to be a horrific exhibition. The idea was very simple.
Why was it horrific?
It didn't function. It didn't work. It was a co-creative show we did with a lot of youngsters with contemporary art, and there was no curator involved.
Well,
and so they had complete freedom, and we elaborated. We produced what they told us to do, and so we did the show, and well, it didn't function, not in a spatial sense, not in a visual sense. So, you still have in the team you still have people with their own know-how, with the métier, like they say in France, of how to do things. So you still, in the process, you have to open up for everybody's ideas, but also be respectful for everybody's know-how. If the production team says, well, we're not going to do that, okay, then story's over.
no, I agree with you. But what did you learn from the process, and did you try again?
Oh yeah, we learned a lot. It was a horrible show, so it was a magnificent experiment. Because we did indeed learn a lot. And what we learned, for instance, was, okay, next time we don't go for co-creation, we're not going to give unlimited freedom. We're going to limit the freedom. We're going to give choices. We're going to not say, this is our entire collection, please choose. We're going to say, this is a selection we've made already, and here you can play with. It's really a process thing, and it's quite hard to learn it at an institute.
Yes, it does take some commitment, it takes some investment. But let me also counter by saying that there are some traditional exhibitions that have been quite horrific or have not functioned as well.
Absolutely true. That's absolutely true. Yeah. But that's the métier of the curator. Of course, if he doesn't know his métier, then the exhibition will be horrific. That's absolutely true.
And I'm not suggesting that educuration or co-curation proceed without a curator. We need all the right people, all the right expertise at the table. I'm just saying with co-curation, you have the advantage of not having to have all the expertise in one person.
Yeah, and that's another question I wanted to ask. Normally in a museum, you already have all those skills. In a team, you have curators, educators, or do we need to learn new skills?
There may be other skills. I worked at an academic museum, and we frequently tried to enlarge the type of exhibition that we would take, traveling exhibitions. So we took one on Costa Rica that was about gold, jade, and forests. And we had 6 curators sitting around the table saying, this looks like a great exhibition, but not my expertise, not my expertise. So we went over to anthropology, and we found an anthropologist who studied Costa Rica. We had another traveling exhibition about Czech scenography. Did not have that expertise either, so we went to the theater department.
Okay.
Sometimes it is people in your community who have cultural knowledge or historical memory. And they can be very important. And it's a different type of expertise that those of us who work in museums did not get through our education.
And then also you get a much better relationship with the community around you.
Also, I mean, that's part of the idea of co-curation. It's not speaking for them when we don't necessarily know.
It's speaking with them.
Yes.
And accepting the consequences, because there are a lot of consequences if you do that. you can have a dramatic reinterpretation of a work of art because somebody who has not, let's say, a traditional art historian background interprets it in its own way. And then as a curator, you have to say, okay, he's totally or she's totally entitled to have his own interpretation. That's a power play again.
Sometimes, though, you even get in positions where people have different conceptions of what's a work of art.
Well, we get that a lot sometimes.
And that's where the educator at the table comes in.
How so? Elaborate, please.
In the United States, we've studied what we call levels of aesthetic development. And curators, people who work in museums, are very highly trained. And someone who comes from public education does not have benefit of that training, so has different ideas about those sorts of things. And so you're almost back to the curator-educator thing, where we've got very different conceptions of this. And you don't want to give up what you know, and they don't want to think that what they know is less worthwhile. But that's where the educator can be the mediator and find ways to help people understand what it is that the curator is seeing and help bring the general public along.
There's something else that was crossing my mind. If you talk about the empowerment of our visitors, well, you open up to the entire world because all our visitors not only have European or American backgrounds. Doing this, it opens it up to, in fact, everybody. Here in Leuven, we have 150 different kind of nationalities. They're all then welcome. That isn't
well, I never said that everybody gets a seat at the table every time.
Would be nice, though.
I think it's a matter of carefully choosing the appropriate community knowledge bearers who can add something to the exhibition that you're trying to produce. You use the term empowering. For me, I like to think about it as dignifying their lives and their experiences. For me, dignifying is about respecting what somebody has to offer. Empowering could be letting them have power whether or not they have the expertise to match that.
Yes. Okay, I'm going to disagree on that.
Okay.
No, not disagree. No. That's
push me, come on.
In my experience, you want to empower people because the visitors, most of the visitors who come in a museum, they are not trained visually. They are not emancipated. They don't dare to give their own meaning to an artwork. Especially for the visual and art, everybody has this expertise. So I think empowering and dignifying, if you can push people to really go to a museum and do the work themselves, that's also respecting them for what they think an artwork can mean, no?
Okay, I think that everybody, whether they recognize it or not, whether we recognize it or not, has a level of aesthetic development. And they're going to respond to that based on that if they don't have other information. So someone might look at this and say, that looks pretty real, that's good.
Yeah.
And that is a specific level of aesthetic development. And that person is going to be, without additional mediation, is going to be hard to see it in a different way.
Okay.
And so for me, dignifying is recognizing that, yes, that is how you see it. But there might be more to that. Okay. And that's where the education part comes in.
One final question, if I may. It's quite a classic question, but anyway. What's your ideal museum / what's your ideal museum visitor?
Oh, how much time do we have?
Go, please.
My ideal museum visitor is anybody who wants to be there and is open-minded enough to come in and look and be open to learn. I don't know if there's an ideal museum, but I do appreciate museums that are willing to experiment and play and do co-curation and who really recognize the importance of engaging the public with what they have here. Otherwise, you could be an archive, not even open the doors.
So an ideal museum for you is in fact a place to experiment.
an ideal museum for me is like a public forum. Where multiple people can go, multiple people can engage in different ways, and where the museum is willing to openly share what it has.
I think that your model is going to be a very useful tool for a lot of museums to achieve that goal.
I hope so. Back when I started in the field, my experience was that there were lots of museums who really wanted to open their doors and put on exhibitions for people who are a lot like them, as opposed to a broader public.
There was, in the last, let's say, 2 decades, there's a dramatic shift in that, isn't there?
Yes, it's improving. Yes.
Improving, that's...
Yes.
I find it quite, I mean, improving, yes. It's mildly put. I mean, there's a lot of experiments going on now.
Yes, indeed, okay.
It's going to be interesting because I want to learn more about your model, and I want to see whether we can implement it. Have you thought about the practical implications to implement your model in museums? For instance, the museum educators on the floor, how are you going to educate them in your model? Is it only for curators and high-level educators, also the people in the galleries that talk to people, the guardians in the halls, these kind of people, they should also have a part in that?
Oh, I agree completely. There are a couple places in the United States where I co-curated exhibitions, and we actually worked with the floor staff, with the volunteers, with the educators, talking to them very deliberately about what the intent was, and then asking them, how does that change your role? How does that change your responsibilities in the galleries? And they were able to see, oh, I'm not trying to convey knowledge at this point. I'm a facilitator. So those things really are all possible. I've been working with this, well, first Curation and this for, over between 5 and 10 years. You have to think rather thoroughly and deliberately about it. You have to be open to failures. And, you learn from your failures and keep going if you're committed to the idea.
Okay. Well, I'm going to look forward in order to see how we can implement your model in our museum here in Leuven. But it was marvelous to talk to you. It's very instructive, and I hope we can continue the discussion for still a long time, because I really want to learn from you.
I hope so. I always enjoy talking with you, Peter, and I will be here through the rest of the year.
Okay, marvelous. Thank you very much.